In the early 1980s, Chicago football was a pressure cooker, and no one felt the heat more than Vince Evans, a gifted black quarterback who had spent years waiting for the city, the media, and his own franchise to finally believe in him. He came out of USC as a Rose Bowl MVP with one of the strongest arms in the country, but in Chicago, that never seemed to matter. He wasn't just battling defenses, he was battling stereotypes, politics, and a system that only wanted him when things were hopeless. And then everything changed the moment Mike Ditka walked through the door. Ditka brought toughness, swagger, and a reputation for rebuilding the Bears from the ground up. But in his mind, Vince Evans wasn't part of that future. It didn't matter that Evans had the arm talent, it didn't matter that he'd survived the worst years of the franchise. Ditka wanted his quarterback, his system, and his identity. In Evans, he became the odd man out before he even took a snap. Instead of finally getting a fair shot, Vince Evans found himself pushed further down the depth chart, boxed out of meetings, and quietly erased from the long-term plan. And when Ditka made it clear he wasn't going to give Evans the opportunity he had waited his whole career for, Evans did the unthinkable. He walked away from the NFL entirely. But what happened next changed football history forever. Before the politics, before the benchings, before Mike Ditka slammed the door shut on his NFL future, Vince Evans was the quarterback everyone swore would become a star. At USC, he wasn't just good, he was electric, a dual threat before the word even existed. Evans had the flair of a playmaker and the calm of a surgeon. He led one of college football's most demanding programs with poise, toughness, and a command that made veterans twice his age listen when he spoke. And when the lights shined brightest, he delivered. The 1977 Rose Bowl didn't just cement Vince Evans as a champion, it made him a national name. He outplayed Michigan with a performance that felt like destiny announcing itself. USC fans believed he was the next great Trojan quarterback. Scouts believed he had the arm strength, the mobility, and the leadership to thrive in the NFL. Broadcasters openly predicted long careers and Pro Bowls. So when the Chicago Bears drafted him, the expectation wasn't if he would become their franchise quarterback, it was when. Evans walked into the NFL with momentum behind him, a championship pedigree, and the belief that with patience and development, Chicago could finally build something special around him. But that's where the story starts twisting. Instead of nurturing the quarterback they invested in, Evans found himself stuck behind veterans, caught in a carousel of coaching changes, and battling a league still reluctant to embrace black quarterbacks. Chicago needed a leader, yet never seemed willing to let their most talented young passer actually lead. Evans had the resume, he had the talent, he had the locker room's respect. What he didn't know, not yet, was that the greatest threat to his career wasn't another player, it was the franchise he trusted and the coach who was on his way. Because once Mike Ditka arrived, everything Vince Evans had earned was about to be erased. When Vince Evans arrived in Chicago, he expected competition, but not warfare. The Bears hadn't had stability at quarterback in years, and fans were desperate for a spark. Evans believed he could be that spark. He believed the organization would develop him the way USC did, with patience, with structure, with faith. But from day one, the message in Chicago was more reps and more excuses than he ever received. Evans showed flashes, big plays, tight window throws, and rare athleticism, but the front office treated him like a last resort instead of an investment. Coaches talked about him with phrases like maybe one day, needs time, or he's not ready yet, even when his skill set was obvious to everyone in the locker room. In the Chicago media, brutal. They dissected him with coded language, questioning his decision-making, his discipline, his ability to manage a game. Critiques they rarely aimed at white quarterbacks with worse numbers. For Evans, it felt less like a competition and more like a test he wasn't allowed to pass. He kept his head down, worked, studied film, outperformed expectations, and still felt the door cracking only halfway open. By the early 1980s, he thought he had finally earned the belief of the organization. He'd stuck it out through losing seasons, survived staff changes, and shown improvement that should have guaranteed him a real chance to lead. But then Chicago made a move that told Vince Evans everything he needed to know about his future with the team. A move that would change the power structure. A move that would place his career into the hands of a coach known for playing favorites and for having very little patience for quarterbacks he didn't personally choose. Because in 1982, Mike Ditka walked into Halas Hall, and for Vince Evans, the countdown had already begun. When Mike Ditka took over the Chicago Bears in 1982, the entire building shifted. He wasn't just a new coach, he was a force of nature, loud, demanding, uncompromising, a man who wanted his guys, his system, and absolute control from day one. For some players, that was exciting. For Vince Evans, it was the beginning of the end. Ditka didn't hide his preferences. He liked quarterbacks who fit a certain mold, traditional, pocket first, and hand selected by him. Evans, despite his arm strength and experience, was immediately placed in a silent category, not Ditka's guy. It didn't matter that Evans had survived losing seasons, carried bad offenses, or earned the respect of the locker room. Ditka had already made up his mind. Meetings changed, reps changed, the tones changed. Evans noticed that conversations he used to be included in were now happening without him. Ditka spoke about rebuilding the quarterback room, about new leadership, about fresh direction. None of it technically pointed at Evans, yet all of it did. And on the practice field, it got even clearer. The offense began leaning toward a style that didn't play to Evans' strengths. Younger quarterbacks were given more looks. Ditka talked to some players more than others, and Evans could feel the temperature. He was being evaluated not on potential, but on whether he fit into Ditka's vision, a vision that didn't include him. Inside the locker room, teammates saw it before Evans ever admitted it. Ditka wants his own quarterback, they whispered. Translation, your time is running out. After years of waiting for the organization to finally commit to him, Evans suddenly found himself sliding backward. Not because of injuries, not because of performance, but because a new head coach decided the deck needed reshuffling. And Evans was a card he didn't plan on using. And the most painful part, Ditka never had to say a word. The pushout wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, strategic, calculated. It was the kind of move a coach makes when he wants you gone, but doesn't want to take the blame. And soon, that subtle shift would turn into a direct, unmistakable message. If Vince Evans wanted to start, he'd have to do it somewhere else. For years, Vince Evans had fought for every inch of opportunity in Chicago. He survived the losing seasons, the media attacks, the doubts, the stereotypes, the benchings, all of it. And with the new coaching regime, he still hoped this might be the moment when everything finally turned his way. But Mike Ditka wasn't easing Evans into a fair competition, he was squeezing him out. Ditka wanted a clean slate at quarterback, and he didn't try to hide it. Practices became colder, reps shrank. Evans found himself standing on the sideline more than he ever had. Plays were being designed around quarterbacks Ditka preferred, pocket-first passers he believed fit his vision of a tough, traditional Bears offense. Evans' athleticism, his mobility, his big play potential, Ditka didn't value it. He valued control, structure, predictability. Evans felt like a puzzle piece from the old Chicago that Ditka was eager to replace. Behind the scenes, it grew even worse. Evans was left out of certain meetings. Ditka stopped giving him meaningful feedback. It wasn't coaching, it was distancing. The kind of distancing that tells a player, don't get comfortable, you won't be here long. Evans wasn't just competing, he was being phased out. Then came the moment everything snapped. Chicago made it clear they were exploring other quarterbacks, younger ones, cheaper ones with less experience but more appeal to Ditka. Evans had given the franchise years of loyalty, but Ditka was building his own era, and there was no room for the guy who wasn't part of his blueprint. Teammates noticed it, reporters noticed it, Evans definitely noticed it. So for the first time in his career, Vince Evans faced an impossible choice. Stay in a system that wanted him gone, or gamble everything on a new league nobody trusted yet. And that gamble would redefine his life, because Vince Evans was about to shock the NFL by leaving it. When Vince Evans walked out of the NFL and into the USFL, It wasn't just a contract move, it was a declaration. A quarterback the Bears never believed in. A quarterback Mike Ditka quietly pushed aside had finally taken control of his own destiny, and Chicago never saw it coming. The USFL at the time was the wild frontier of football. Big money, bold promises, and a chance for players who'd been overlooked or undervalued to rewrite their careers. For Evans, it represented something far more personal: freedom. For the first time since USC, he would get a system built around his strengths, a coaching staff that actually wanted him, and a franchise willing to hand him the keys without hesitation. He signed with George Allen's Chicago Blitz, and the move sent shockwaves through the NFL. Newspapers blasted him for leaving. Analysts mocked the USFL as a circus league. Some fans accused him of quitting, but the truth? Evans didn't run from competition, he ran from a coach who refused to give him one. Under Allen, the difference was immediate. Evans wasn't fighting for reps, he wasn't looking over his shoulder, he wasn't waiting for someone to believe in him. He was the guy, the leader, and it showed. His confidence returned, his command returned, the big arm, the mobility, the swagger he had back at USC, it was all there. And Chicago noticed, Ditka noticed. The same player they buried suddenly looked reborn just a few miles away. Yet, his journey was far from over. The USFL would rise, then collapse. Teams would fold, merge, and vanish. And while the league gave Evans the belief he'd been denied, its downfall would force him to make the toughest comeback attempt of his life. Because after the USFL fell apart, Vince Evans wasn't just fighting for a job, he was fighting for survival. When the USFL collapsed, most players had options waiting for them in the NFL. Vince Evans didn't. Teams weren't calling, scouts weren't curious. Coaches framed him as a USFL guy now, as if leaving Chicago to escape Mike Ditka's shadow somehow meant he wasn't good enough to return. It was the same story Evans had battled his entire career. The league judged him without ever giving him a fair look. For the first time since he picked up a football, Vince Evans wondered if the NFL had closed for good. The league had a new wave of quarterbacks, new philosophies, and even fewer opportunities for a black quarterback who had already challenged the system once. Weeks turned into months, then months into a full season. Vince Evans was out of football entirely, not because of talent, not because of injuries, but because the NFL had moved on without him. But Evans wasn't done, and he wasn't broken. In 1987, almost no one believed he'd ever take another NFL snap. Then the Los Angeles Raiders, a franchise known for giving second chances to players the league tried to bury, picked up the phone. They needed leadership, they needed toughness, they needed someone who had already faced the worst football could throw at him and kept swinging. Evans was perfect for them, even if the rest of the league didn't realize it yet. And when he walked into that locker room, something clicked. For the first time since USC, Evans felt valued. The Raiders didn't care about his past with Ditka. They didn't care about the media narratives. They cared about one thing: could he play? And when Evans finally got under center, he reminded everyone exactly who he was. He threw darts, he made plays, he orchestrated comebacks. He became a steady, respected veteran presence. What the Bears discarded, the Raiders revived. The quarterback Mike Ditka pushed out of the NFL ended up playing well into his 40s, outlasting critics, doubters, and even some of the coaches who once wrote him off. But his story wasn't just about longevity, it was about defiance. Evans proved that a quarterback the NFL tried to bury could still carve out a decade-long second act. He proved that talent doesn't disappear just because opportunity does. And he proved that sometimes a legend doesn't need a franchise to believe in him. He just needs himself. Yet history still left out one thing: the truth about why he ever had to leave Chicago in the first place. And that truth is why Vince Evans' legacy remains one of the most misunderstood stories in football history. Vince Evans' journey is one of the most remarkable in football history, not because it was clean or celebrated, but because it survived everything thrown against it. A Rose Bowl champion, a quarterback with undeniable talent, a leader who fought through stereotypes, front office politics, and media scrutiny. But in Chicago, none of that seemed to matter. Not when Mike Ditka arrived, not when Evans needed belief the most. This is Old School Sundays, bringing you the legends the game forgot, the pioneers the league overlooked, and the stories history buried. Another name that should have been celebrated but wasn't, another forgotten chapter in the game's true history. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you next time with more football history.